This is the best of First and Last, the podcast, with Mike Golic Jr. and Robin Lundberg.
Good night, Blazers. What's the expression? It got late early?
Yeah.
Blazers last night?
No, we got to say goodnight to them in about the first quarter. At least they got to go to bed early. They got plenty of sleep last night because that was over before it started.
You Steph Curry doing some Steph Curry things, as you heard on the call there, and we're back. We're back on that march to inevitability. I feel like some of these topics we put them to the side for a while, and then we come back, and it could be a day of like, well, the Cavs swept their first round series, and the Warriors swept their first round series. But I guess not all sweeps are created equal. I don't think, you could make the argument Indiana is just as good as Portland, if not better than Portland. In fact, I probably would make that argument that they're better than Portland. But the way the Golden State Warriors look when they are in their zone, you're now watching the throne kind of deal.
It does. It feels like a great wheel. Like we just wait for the topics to come back around throughout the playoffs. And what can you say? I think in each of their 4 wins, they were over 120 points. We know defensively what Golden State's capable of. Last night was a laughing stock. You turn on that game and you see it starts off on a 14-0 run for Golden State. They're up 35-9 in the first quarter en route to a 45-point first quarter, which I think was the most in a playoff first quarter in franchise history for Golden State. So a freakish performance by a bunch of freakishly talented offensive players.
And we'll get some straight talk from the head coach of the Losers, brought to you by Straight Talk Wireless. Best phones, best networks, half the cost. Here was Terry Stotts after his team's exit.
Golden State will be decided by how they fare in the playoffs and if they win a championship. That being said, I think they're better than they were last year. I think they're more versatile. I think they're more explosive offensively. I think they're playing with a purpose, considering what happened last year. So they're formidable, and it's going to take a great series to beat them, for anybody to beat them.
Straight Talk Wireless, nationwide coverage on America's largest and most dependable networks. Now, the simple thing to say, Mike, is you took last year's team, essentially the core of it remains intact, and you added Kevin Durant. But let me take that a step further, because obviously, Durant was added to that roster. But if you look at it and you were to say, okay, if we're power ranking the importance of Warriors players, maybe that's a little bit more instructive, because Kevin Durant, to me, is no higher than their third most important player. It's Steph and Draymond. Those are the 2 guys I don't think they can win a championship without. Steph is the only guy who does what he does on that roster, handling the ball and all that stuff. And there's a gravity to the way he plays, where even when he's not at his best, you still are game planning to trap him up high and do things that occupy your defense and expose you in other places. And then Draymond's the only guy on that roster who obviously does what he does defensively, being able to guard everyone on the floor essentially and play up in size and guard as a big. So you're taking a very recently former MVP, probably a top 5 player in the NBA, inarguably a top 10 player in the NBA, and he is the third most important player on that team at best.
Yeah, and now most important, I could argue skill-wise he's their best player, but I'm 100% with you on importance. And we had this conversation last year, especially because of his notable absence in the finals. Very easy argument that Draymond's the most important guy. I mean, Draymond Green, who's listed at 6'7", so that's probably a bit generous, is averaging over 4 blocks a game so far in this postseason, which is insane. The amount of things that he does for this team, he seeps in everywhere. He's kind of like water. He just finds his way into every nook and cranny of this team and finds a way to influence. I mean, hell, last night Sean Livingston's still out for them and sat last night. We obviously have plenty of time to recover and be back for the next series. But basically was running point for them while that second lineup was out there, while Steph and all those guys were out there. So he's got the versatility to give you so much.
Yeah, the liquid analogy is a good one because, man, having kids, it really boggles my mind how far it can go. Because you look at a cup, you're like, there's not that much in there, but it turns over, boy. And that's not right. It doesn't feel like that should work the way it does.
No, yeah, its reach is almost never ending. God forbid it's in something like a couch or a car seat, anywhere where there's a bunch of nooks and crannies that it can find its way into. And that's Draymond Green, because it's kind of annoying while it does it too, especially if you're on the other end of said liquid. So the parallels are overwhelming for a guy that's again, we could say it, Golden State's most important player.
A very unique player. I mean, really You struggle with the defensive player of the year. Kawhi has won it a few times. Rudy Gobert had an awesome year defensively for Utah, but I'm not sure anybody was more important specifically defensively this year than Draymond. And I'm trying to think of a comparison. Probably the easy one is Dennis Rodman. Dennis Rodman back in his heyday was also known for not everything always going according to plan upstairs, but also was a guy who was versatile in the way he could guard and play up and big. But he wasn't the offensive playmaker that Draymond Green is. That's the other thing. The one drawback for the Warriors this year, I guess, if we're looking for it, is Draymond only shot 31% from three this year, which is down from where he was last year when they won 73 games. So that's your best hope, I suppose, if you're a team like let's just say the Cavs, is you're going to just hope somebody self-checks themselves for a series and gets cold, and you can leave them open to allocate your resources elsewhere, and they're just missing those shots.
And that's why nights like last night are particularly scary, because when you have Draymond Green going 5 for 8 from three in a performance where he looks pretty rock solid from out there, which, by the way, there's got to be a direct correlation between Steve Kerr's presence on the bench and Draymond Green three-point attempts and his confidence from behind the line.
Yeah.
Because we know they had that blow-up as part of the 73-win season where Steve Kerr was lamenting some of Draymond's shot choice once he came back to that lineup. And then, like you said, down big off that last year to this year when Steve Kerr was back there full-time. Steve Kerr is gone night one, and Draymond was pulling up early and often from beyond the arc.
Steve Kerr, really thoughts go out to him in his situation. That is a rough one. We were talking about this before the show. I mean, his win percentage, if you think about it for a coach, is out of control good at this point. He's also got to, I don't mean this to be tongue-in-cheek, it's just the truth, right? He's going to have to be compiling the most wins for someone not actually coaching the games between Luke Walton and now what Mike Brown is going to do maybe for the rest of this playoff.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting, and you hear more and more about what he's going through, and you think, I mean, this could be, as far as his coaching career threatening right now. And on his side, I wouldn't push that too far. I mean, look at all of this guy's accomplished. Like it's borderline insane and kind of obnoxious that he would keep trying to go and be that much better than all of us at everything that he's done so consistently. Like at some point, you have to, he probably is having that reality now that his health is going to have to become more of a priority for him, unfortunately. But what a body of work he's got to look back on whenever this does end for him. It's been remarkable.
You talked about it being a threat to his coaching career. Here was Brian Windhorst on SportsCenter.
He's been managing this for a while, and, he's been very candid with people behind the scenes about how difficult this has been on him. And there's been concern about him being able to do this long term for about a year now.
Wow.
Because he's been managing this pain. But it hasn't been this bad. It has been manageable. It got worse on him. It flared up on him over the last week, and it really took him downhill very quickly. Nobody saw this coming, not his doctors, not Steve. And so he wouldn't have flown to Portland, for example, if he knew it was going to be this bad. It got worse after he got there. So there is a hope, from what I understand, with his doctors and with Steve, that he might be able to get past this current flare-up and come back and coach. I think that is what they're all hoping to have. But his long-term situation is there. And it wasn't really talked about that much, Scott, because those of us who knew about it, who Steve confided in, he's so open with everything in general. We would always give him the space to talk about it when he was ready. But it is a serious threat to his coaching future. And unfortunately, it has been for some time.
Well, obviously, we all hope the best for Steve Kerr, his coaching career, and of course, his personal life dealing with that sort of pain.
First and last, the podcast.
Producer guy Dan Z is a few things. He's a hockey guy. He's also a Bucks fan.
Sneaky Bucks fan, yeah. Slid that one in here really under the radar for us.
He may not know that I noticed this, but I did notice this because we didn't really talk about it that day. But when the Bucks had gone up 2-1 in this series against the Raptors, he wrote something in the show note about how we could all make fun of me for being wrong. And First of all, we've gone over this a lot. People really like it when I'm wrong. I mean, there's just something about my personality that makes people want to see me be wrong.
Just something about your face. I don't know what it is, but
that smug look on my face.
You don't fix it. I'm going to fix it for you.
I've constant smug. But here's the thing, producer guy Danzy. If you said finally I've been proven right. That's the thing. If I wasn't right before, you just got to wait a little bit longer. And then it turns out.
Is that how it works, Robin? That's all we need to do is just, you give it time. You got to give it a little bit of time to grow. You're like one of those little toys that you put in water. You just got to give it a little bit, and then it's going to grow into the full-size action figure.
Those are very underwhelming, by the way.
I disagree. I think they're fantastic.
You think the idea of them is fantastic, but they don't really grow that much. I mean, they go from like little sponge thing to like, all right, 2.5-inch sponge thing.
See, then that's even more
reverse shrinkage.
That's even more emblematic of you then.
That I'm underwhelmed by those.
No, that we're underwhelmed by the take that Toronto was going to beat the Bucks.
Oh, well, I didn't say they were going to beat the Bucks. I said that Toronto was the biggest threat to Cleveland in my mind in the Eastern Conference, and I still think Toronto has the best roster, top to bottom, of any team in the East. They don't have LeBron. That's, the difference. I still think the Cavs will beat them head up because the Cavs have LeBron. But if you're saying I can look into the eye of Agamotto or whatever it is in Lord of the Rings that they look into to see the future, and the scenario has to be that the Cavs lose in the Eastern Conference, I'm saying it's to the Raptors. And Milwaukee, Dan Z's team, is a tough team to play against because they're not a great team yet. They're an up-and-coming team that they could really use some playmaking and some shooting, much like Oklahoma City. But they have a lot of length, and they have Giannis, who is – I always do that – Giannis, who's such a difficult player to deal with. But what Toronto did was they made an adjustment. Dwayne Casey made a smart adjustment after that game in Game 3, and he sent Valanciunas to the bench. And to me, the best role for the traditional big who scores like in the way that you imagine, give him the ball down low and he's going to get you buckets, is actually the leading offensive player for the second unit. We saw Greg Monroe do that for Milwaukee too. That's where I think that the traditional post guy thrives the most. But where that move really helped them is it opened up the floor a little bit so that they could deal with that length of Milwaukee, and it gave space for Lowry and DeRozan to operate. Norman Powell's come in and been great, and Serge Ibaka at center. That's just, it's a tough matchup for a lot of teams. That's why I like Toronto. The best is their versatility in that sense. And I just listed a lot of really good players, too.
I also like your point there because it makes those big guys mad, clearly, having to come off the bench, because we almost got Valanciunas versus Monroe round 1 last night. I thought that was going to explode into something much bigger. I thought they'd been paying attention to the Bulls-Celtics series and thought, okay, maybe we'll get in on the action. But you're right, it forces them into a different role. Still a role nonetheless, and you're right, especially for Milwaukee. I think having that added edge and toughness is what they've got to thrive on at this point. And they talked last night about Jason Kidd being a good, steady leader for that young team. And, there were some quotes for him last night of this team needing to understand, this is what happens every once in a while. You got to get taken behind the woodshed a little bit.
Here's the quote and reference in question. Jason
You
Kidd.
can talk about it, but you got to go out there and you got to play, and you got to go through it, and you got to know how it feels to get your kicked, right? And that's what happened tonight. And being a young team, we were in that position in Game 3, and just understand what just took place so that we know what we have to do come Game 6.
And I wouldn't count out Jason Kidd making the adjustment. I've said this on this show plenty of times and otherwise. That guy's a basketball genius. Whatever you think of him and some of his transgressions off the court, if you've ever watched him on the court, watched the way he played, I don't think it's any coincidence that when he was with Dallas, they were the team that upset that Heat team in the first year. When he was with the Knicks, that was the most success that franchise has basically ever had if you're under the age of 30, right? He now goes to coach the Nets. He made the adjustment midseason of putting Paul Pierce up to the power forward position. Before that was all in vogue. And now with Milwaukee, he's done some really good things. So I don't doubt that Jason Kidd will make the necessary adjustment and maybe even something to pull out the next game. I just think overall the Bucks' talent deficit, given the number of options Toronto has, is going to be their undoing in the series.
Yeah, the better team should probably win out in this one in Toronto. I'm more interested now that I think especially for a nation that probably didn't pay nearly enough attention to them despite what Giannis accomplished during the regular season that was unparalleled. I think going forward, the Bucks are a little more on the radar now because of what we've seen in the series. So now I'm interested in the evolution, and Jason Kidd's the perfect guy to have at the helm, nurturing a budding young superstar.
Let's go to Jeff. You're up first here on First and Last. Go ahead, man.
Hey, Robin, I just wanted to know, you said a few years ago that when LeBron James was going to lose the finals to the Golden State Warriors, that he should be the MVP because he's done so much and that he's got no help. But yet this year, when Russell Westbrook does a lot more in the whole season, 82 games, he's not as good as James Harden because he can't win as many games. Now, LeBron wasn't going to win as many games as the other team in the finals, so how could LeBron have been the MVP of the finals, but yet Russell Westbrook couldn't be the MVP of the regular season because he hasn't won as many games as James Harden? I'm just curious which
well,
time
first
were
of all,
you
you're
right? The first time or the second time?
First of all, you're attributing things to me that I don't think I ever said. Second
You
of all,
didn't think,
I didn't say
LeBron
James
was
Harden's the
going to be
MVP. Well, I said LeBron should be the MVP every year. Yes, I say that. What does that have to do with
Two
James
years
Harden?
ago in the finals, you said he should be the MVP against Golden State.
Yeah.
He had no help because everybody was hurt.
Yes, so?
Well, so now this year you're saying Russell Westbrook shouldn't be the MVP. Where's his help? And he's done so much more.
So much more what? Than being in the
So
finals?
much more winning in the regular season than LeBron did in the finals, and much closer to
That's a nonsensical point, Jeff. I mean, good try. You can weigh in, Mike. I
don't know what there really is to weigh in on there. And also, have you been that outspoken against Russell Westbrook winning the MVP? Have you been that outstanding on the James Harden side?
I haven't.
I've beaten the Russ drum a little more than you have, so maybe I will side with Jeff on this one. You're wrong. I'm right.
If I had an MVP ballot, I would have voted for LeBron James.
Yeah, we know that.
Everybody knows it. But for practical purposes, Russell Westbrook is the guy I think is going to win the MVP. And, if you're telling me, like, practically I was voting, that's who I would have voted for somebody who has an actual chance to win it. I wonder if LeBron's going to come in fourth, by the way. You think he's going to come in fourth?
There's a very real chance. So who would you go then? Russ, James Harden, and then Kawhi?
Kawhi Leonard's in that mix, too. And all the NBA quote-unquote nerds are voting for Kawhi.
Think about that. In one of the best statistical seasons LeBron's had, especially for a player his age, and he could be the fourth place MVP vote getter.
First and last.
The idea that your draft status drops dramatically just seems kind of crazy to me. I guess I could reason it as the team saying, all right, this guy can't be professional enough to not fail a test or not scheme the test going into the draft, and therefore his judgment is in question? Is that where it comes from?
No, really more of it for me is the fact that, so now for both of these guys, so for anyone that missed it too, Jabril Peppers, the Michigan everything. He's going into the NFL as a safety prospect, but played linebacker at Michigan, wore a lot of different hats for them. Also came back with a diluted sample from the combine, which counts as a positive test in the NFL's drug testing policy. So what happens for both these guys now is they go into the program. And that's the worst thing that could happen to you if you are a guy that does use, because we've often talked about on here, the NFL's drug testing policy is the idiot test. You get tested once on one time of year. Shout out to the guys that got tested on 420 and had themselves a nice day following that. But you get tested once, and then you don't get tested again for non-PEDs. It's the street drug, the quote-unquote street drug test.
Yeah.
And so you don't get tested after that. So in theory, once you pass that test, you're good. Now, when you go into the program, it's different because then it becomes like PEDs where it can be random. So you can be tested at any time and much more frequently once you're in the program. And once you fail one of those tests, then you're missing games. So that's the thing for teams is they're hung up on is, all right, this guy's one failed test away from all of a sudden our investment isn't on the field for us for 4 games or whatever that first offense is.
Okay, that makes sense. Whenever you say street drugs in the program, it just cracks me up, though, considering what we're talking about here. I have to almost issue the disclaimer because I agree with everyone who says that it's the rule. You're going into this professional environment. Just figure you've said it, idiot test, whatever, all those things. Just pass the test and go about your business. Don't put yourself in that situation. Like, I agree with that stock point, but that doesn't mean the rule isn't stupid. I mean, and we're beyond this. Like, tired of this popping up. We have the circular topics, and we talk about the Warriors, now their march to maybe inevitable championship. This keeps coming up over and over again, and it keeps coming up in a society that continues to trend the other way. Well, I think the latest poll says 61% of the population is for marijuana legalization, period. We've seen states go in a particular direction, whether Jeff Sessions wants them to or not, right? Like that's the world we're living in right now. And when you look at performance for football players, I just don't see the rationale and I don't see the logic. Now, last night in the email chain, you raised the point because I had said, I just don't understand why the NFL doesn't end this.
Yeah, and part of the reason is because in the NFL, that side will be quick to point out that this is something that's collectively bargained. So the players were just as complicit in this drug testing policy. And like anything else that's collectively bargained, my dad makes this point all the time, is they're bargaining chips on either side. So if you're the players and you want to push for reform in this area and lessening of the penalties and a change of the drug policy, you're giving up something somewhere else to the ownership side.
I guess I just don't think like that, right? So, like, I understand. My brain isn't wired to think in those terms, like, I'm going to have this so I can hold it over their head a little bit later. I'm much more, I suppose, I would like to think a little bit more rational and logical, just like, all right, it's not a good look for the NFL for this to continue to be a subject of controversy. And there's really no downside. There is zero downside to just not testing. That's it. You don't have to go out in this pro campaign. You don't have to have Roger Goodell wearing like Grateful Dead shirts and rapping along to Ain't Nothing But a G Thing. You just have it not be tested for and done.
It is, but at the same time, now that it is a thing, it is something that ownership can use on their side to get something, because comparatively, who this affects, it is the ownership side isn't losing out on money the way that the individual players who are affected by this buy. And the other portion of that is it's still a small number of players who are actually getting popped for games off the drug testing policy. So if you're the PA who's charged with representing the 2,000 whatever players that are part of the NFL, you're not going to go and give away something for a handful of guys that you're trying to help out.
Well, and in the NFL, it's tough because you are the players group is so large. They're the least taken care of every major sports league. Their job security is the worst.
Well, and also the priorities are the most different from top to bottom, because in the NBA, we're talking about guys that are 16, 17-year vets right now. And those seem to be more common than their NFL counterparts, but you've got a true definition of the haves, the guys that are big contract, full-time starters, going to be around the years, can think long-term, and the other side that the average career is less than 3 years.
Well, think about it as like a bit of a microcosm for society at large, right? Because unless you're Cheech and Chong or whatever, there are plenty of weed smokers out there who obviously want it to be legal just to make their life easier. But in the grand scheme of things, is that the first thing that you want, that you're actually campaigning for or marching for or all that, because it is trivial in that ranking, right? Same thing goes for the players. If you're looking at what you're trying to collectively bargain, yes, there are plenty of guys who are just like, come on, let's make this legal. Why do we have to worry about this whole ordeal? But there are bigger fish to fry.
There are, but that being said, the players have figured out what's the one avenue right now that the NFL is always looking for wins on. What's the one area we can go towards that we know the league, in its constant effort to save face with the public, is always trying to win in? Player safety. And so the NFLPA this offseason formed the Pain Management Committee that's studying the effects of using marijuana for medicinal purposes, for pain management. We know the stuff with the painkillers has come up more and more, the opioid drugs, and as that becomes slowly sort of epidemic level in this country. And so now they can slip that in under the guise if their research comes back and they've got the numbers to go and show the league and say, listen, this can be a way for us to wean guys off that stuff that we are slowly pointing to as more concrete than ever, that is really harming guys, and we can use that as a way to manage pain. We can introduce it into the league in that way. I think it gives them a way better chance of going to the table and saying, all right, listen, we got an easy win for both sides here.
Yeah, I mean, you look at it like that, practically, right? The legality is changing across the country. It's not going to be, I don't think, too long before you're looking at a big for-profit industry. you're talking about it's not a performance enhancer, other than the people who are like, yeah, man, it slows down for me and everything. But in reality, it's not a performance enhancer. It is objectively less harmful for you than opioids, which are, an epidemic right now. And you just mentioned players are affected. It's objectively less harmful for you than alcohol, which is the biggest sponsor that the NFL has. So really, there is no argument for continuing to test play. There's no argument other than it is in the rules, right? Like, that's the argument. It's in the rules. And again, I understand it's in the rules, and if it's in the rules, you're getting paid a lot of money, just pass the test and go about your business. But that doesn't mean the rules shouldn't be changed. Just because that's true doesn't mean you shouldn't change the rule.
Yeah, listen, in theory, in a vacuum, without all of the other labor portions of this, it really is an easy concession at this point, based on the way even other professional sports leagues test for and treat this as much more of a non-issue. This is something that seems to be heightened around the NFL, just because it's one of those that's the way it's always been deals.
Yeah, look at the NBA, right? I mean, I know it's not technically allowed in the NBA, right? There's still some sort of testing policy that goes, but like one guy every 10 years it gets nabbed in the NBA, and I don't think the culture of the NBA is much different as far as partaking than the NFL. And by the way, that goes really across the board. I mean, you're talking about a substance that is widely used by all demographics, basically. So it's not as if, one league like the NFL is just full of lazy stoners or something like that in comparison to every other sports league.
It's a changing conversation in a lot of different ways, and in some regards, you can say this is the NFL lagging behind some of the other leagues, but at the same time, the NFL is not really a league that I see as outpacing what our government decides to do, or what all states decide to legislate as far as this goes. I don't think the NFL is going to be the one that says, we'll get out in front of this and make this okay for all of our guys across the board. It's been a reactionary league in a lot of different senses with these things. I don't see it being much different with this issue.
By the way, Jabril Pepper's agent says he failed his drug test before the draft because he was pounding 8 to 10 bottles of water before bed due to a history of cramping.
Worth noting for both of those guys that it's come up, these similar stories behind there. Reuben Foster mentioned that leading up to the combine, he had been dealing with food poisoning, and same sort of set of circumstances, was trying to hydrate. The one thing I am interested in technically for these guys, because a diluted sample, while it counts as a positive test, isn't the same as testing positive.
Yeah, it's more like an incomplete.
It's an incomplete because the idea is that you'd be trying to mask something in your system. I am interested in when the test is in comparison to the weigh-in for the combine. I wasn't invited to the combine, so I can't claim to know. That's why I hate the combine. I'm sad it's getting all these guys, because the combine's a farce anyway. But that's a story for another day. But the point, when it lies in conjunction with the weigh-in, because one thing I do know is that my pro day, I was pounding water to try and up my weight for that weigh-in, because guys are all cognizant of the fact that they need to hit certain numbers to look good for scouts. And so something that could be realistic is if you are doing that and then you have to go test soon after, that could be a bit of a problem for guys that are trying to make that weigh-in, and then they obviously cut a lot of that water out before they hit the on-field stuff. So just kind of something to keep in mind in that regard.
First and last.
As much as the NFL likes money, I'm surprised they haven't tried to go ahead of the curve on this, because think of weed as a consumer product for sporting events. I mean, the concession sales, the advertisers, you would think, other than alcohol, that would be the one advertiser I could, and therein maybe lies the rub, right?
Yeah, I was going to say the NFL is in pretty deep with some of those alcohol suppliers, so there's a lot of money at stake in that end.
Because other than that, I would think the advertisers would be all for it, right? If you're Doritos or whomever you may be.
Yeah, but you also have to remember who's running the league. It's a lot of old white men who probably have the stigma that surrounds this that persist. Now, that's
reefer madness.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the old prevailing ideologies and thoughts on marijuana probably hold this conversation as much as anything else.
Yeah, and that's I make all these jokes, and I really probably shouldn't, because they play into stereotypes that really don't. There are so many high functioning people who you wouldn't. Let's just put it this way: if you were to say, said player, let me ask you, as if you're a coach. Let's say you go into coaching, and I told you one player A, was out on the town, taking bottles to the face, and player B was taking blunts to the face or whatever the night before, who would you have more faith in to show up on time or to perform better the next day at work?
You know who I'd have faith in? The guy that still balled out on the field. Like, I understand where you're going.
It doesn't matter as long as your performance is there.
Exactly, as long as your performance is there. We know, and it just came out that a piece that Tom Habistro did in the NBA about NBA players electing to party less during the season because they go with that. I was interested, and I think at some point I heard him address the idea that there's also an uptick in the use of marijuana instead as a substitute during the season, knowing that the recovery time is none. There's no physical hangover that comes from that the way you deal with alcohol, where we clearly see it affects your body 4 or 5 days after the time that you're using alcohol. So players understand that more and more. Players in the NFL understand that. I mean, I know guys who operate under that idea that I'm not going to drink during the season when I know it takes me from that Sunday after the game all the way until the next Saturday to fully feel good again.
Well, I think we have to subcategorize people who have a problem.
Yes.
Substances, whatever they may be. There are more people in this country in treatment for alcohol than any other substance. Then it is opioid. I'm like mispronouncing it like I am Giannis. Essentially, opioids is second. But you can have a problem really with any substance. So you subcategorize those people because those people need help,
yes,
and those people need treatment, and they should be treated accordingly. In my opinion, that is a life-ruining affliction, and hopefully everybody that's dealing with that or has a family member dealing with that can get better. Then you take the other people, the other group that isn't dealing with a problem. And I think you look at them individually because a lot of this isn't about the substance, whether it's alcohol, whether it's weed, whatever. It's about the user.
Yes.
And that person and whether or not they're reliable. So they could be doing whatever their vice of choice is or whatever they feel like doing. If they are punctual, if they are reliable, if they perform well, it doesn't matter. Meanwhile, you have other people who, no matter what you're giving them, are going to screw up. And it's not a result of what they're taking. It's a result of the person taking it.
Yeah, I mean, and listen, you could go as far as player evaluation with all this. I knew and played with plenty of guys who could get away with going out during the week, who could do different things, and still were going to show up and give you everything that you wanted once you were on, for lack of a better term, work. At that point, they were going to give you everything you needed in a football sense, and I knew guys that didn't do anything and still couldn't show up time, couldn't get right for what they needed to do responsibility-wise. So when you look at these guys in particular, when you're talking about Jabril Peppers and Reuben Foster, if you're a team, you're going to look into the homework you've done on these guys in general, and for both guys, the book on them seems pretty stellar. Reuben Foster, where it gets interesting, is we know at the Combine he did have that incident with the doctors and was sent home. So are people going to look at that and see a pattern and say, okay, maybe there's some issues there? At the same time, you click on the tape for that guy, and I think between the two, if you're looking for a fall, Jabril Peppers is going to fall a little further because this is a deeper draft defensively up top for defensive backs. We know he's further down the list than some of the other guys in the first round. Reuben Foster, the best at his position, in my mind, by far. But you turn on the tape, and Reuben Foster is a guy that ran Nick Saban's defense at the linebacker position better than almost anyone we'd ever seen. So at some point, you look at that and say, all right, we kind of know who this guy is as a football player. This isn't really emblematic of that. Then you just worry about, okay, does that second positive test, if it comes, take this reliable guy off the field?
How'd Larry McTunsell do this year?
Larry Tunsil, he did okay. I understand the thought process there. He's going to get moved back out to tackle where he belongs. They had him in at guard as people try and kind of force tackles to guard a little bit too much. But he had a decent season for them. I think we'll do better back at his natural position of tackle.
Let's go to Robert in Charlotte, North Carolina. Robert, you're up next here on First and Last. Go ahead.
What's going on, guys?
Yo.
So he ran the defense better than anybody at Alabama.
Yeah.
He ran. Did anybody else? You think anybody else had a diluted sample that ran that defense? Come on, guys. You know why this is not going to be. It's not going to be legalized. This is an image-conscious league, and if you think that people ran away from Bill O'Reilly, if you legalize marijuana, what do you think the advertisers are going to do?
I don't
Well,
think that's a false equivalency.
I think the point is too. The point that we've been trying to make is that there's less and less nationally of a stigma around that as the conversation and the public perception of that shifts. That's going to be a part of it, and that's why I said the NFL is not going to lead on that. But if they see the tides turning, it becomes easier for them to follow.
Yeah, that's a horrific false equivalency he just brought up, actually. And I don't think advertisers would run away at all. The only advertiser I think they'd have to worry about is aforementioned alcohol, which I guess could see as a competitive industry when we get to that point. But yeah, no.
First and last, the podcast.
Sean Mispelli, not happy with the association of hockey and soccer. He tweets in, dude, come on. I'm sorry, but there is no way in HE double hockey sticks that soccer, he didn't write that soccer is nearly as popular as hockey in this country. Au contraire, my friend, I beg to differ. Now, in order to properly do this, we would need all of the viewership data and everything like that. But our unscientific poll has it about 50-50. And here would be my argument for soccer. Remember, I'm not talking the MLS. I'm talking soccer in general, which would include the MLS. But for more people, it seems to be the Premier League, obviously, and La Liga. You have to factor in the overall popularity of the World Cup. The participation is easier and much greater for soccer. FIFA, the video game, is a huge phenomenon. There's nothing like that in hockey, and it's not to diss or diminish hockey. I just think if it hasn't surpassed it, it certainly is going to very shortly.
Well, it's going to be interesting. My argument will always be if you can ever get good enough, and we're probably, if you're pointing to where the success will be, it's a generation away because you need, like anything else, it always helps to have a homegrown American star in what you're doing, and that's the advantage that I know a lot of hockey stars are Canadian, but you do have
Crosby.
You do have enough American representation to at least make it interesting, and it's happening on our home turf. There's something to it being accessible here, because if you want to actually go see a game in person for a lot of the more compelling action, you've got to be over across the pond on a different continent. So there's a difference in being able to go out and see and touch the people that you're watching when you can do it in arenas right here on American soil.
How much do you think it will hurt hockey's popularity in this country if the NHL follows through with its "you're not going to the Olympics" pledge?
I don't think at all, really, too much.
Yeah.
Seriously?
Yeah. I think NHL fan is NHL fan, right? They're there. They're not going anywhere.
That's the difference, is that America is finally catching up to Canada. We've seen it. The U.S. junior team has won the World Cup in recent years. The U.S. men's hockey team in the last Olympics had a fairly decent showing, and there's a chance that America could beat Canada in hockey, but we need to see that on a national stage on a consistent basis. That's why I bring it up.
I suppose the miracle on ice would be like that's something that stands the test of time. I just don't think of the hockey Olympics or World Cup or any of that stuff bringing in as many people as it does with soccer. I've certainly heard it referenced and people talking about it and people gravitate and watch, but I don't think it's that kind of umbrella deal.
Well, I think it's different because, to Dan's point, in the Olympics and in international settings, especially on the men's side, we know our women's team has dominated for a long time when it comes to soccer, but on the men's side, they haven't had near the success that the hockey team has had of late. And so when you can have America's brand being successful in whatever sport it is, it always helps for your mainstream popularity.
The biggest obstacle to soccer's popularity, I think, is that it's difficult to follow and there isn't that league. I think this wouldn't even be a question if the MLS was the top league in the world, when it's not even close to the top league in the world. But you mentioned the American-born players and all that. Yes, the American team here is not as strong, but do you think Sidney Crosby in the United States is more popular than Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo?
Wouldn't even begin to know how to quantify that, because soccer is sort of an outlier, because worldwide it's the most popular sport in the world, so their names are going to resonate everywhere because it's the most visible sport in the world. So maybe to that end they could be, but on American soil, I think you'd have more people that would probably be in tune with the big names in hockey like that. We'll see if that translates to the next generation too now, as Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid start to come up, the young talent that's beginning to insert itself in the league.
Let's go to Matt in Ohio. Matt, you're up next here on First and Last with Robin Lindbergh and Mike Golic Jr. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think it all depends on, if you're playing or if you're watching. Because, you can go out and play soccer. All you need is a field and a ball. But with hockey, you have to really look for somewhere to play. So the younger kids, it seems like hockey is really only exciting when the playoffs get here, and that's when it's normally talked about. But soccer, it's beginning to blow up in America, and it's all over the place.
Well, the most accessible sports are soccer and basketball. You show up to a basketball court with a ball, you can play by yourself. You get a couple of people, you can play. Same as soccer field, whatever, you just need a ball. Hockey is amongst the least accessible sports to play because you need equipment, first of all. Baseball, you need equipment too. But in hockey, you need equipment, and then you need an ice rink, which sort of also makes it very limiting a lot of times, I think, to the regions. You see those original regions where it's colder, where it makes more sense for a sport to have been played on ice.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy rule of thumb. The more equipment you usually need, the tougher it is to have mass appeal and mass exposure for a lot of your sports. Now, football would kind of be the one outlier there. You could even argue for baseball where, it's a little farther down in the chain, but both of those are so steeped in the culture at this point that it's hard to really remove them and the impact that they have at the youth level.
How about David in Michigan? Go ahead, David.
Hey, I agree that hockey's really exciting during the playoffs, but I think the media does a pretty bad job of covering during the regular season. If you gave half the love to the NHL that's given to the NBA on a nightly basis, I think that we'd see a turnaround. Thank you.
And that one's also interesting, too, because of where hockey is on. Like, when you see it, when you have to find a hockey game on NBC Sportsnet, no disrespect to them, but when it's on these smaller chains, we talk about the NBA TV games all the time in this playoff run, it gets a little more difficult to find at certain times, and that's goes back to deals that hockey made themselves before whenever their last TV deal was. I'm always interested how that stuff comes to pay. Like, I know we always say we put on what people want to watch, but sometimes having things on screens that are easier to find, especially the way soccer has been lately, can drive popularity when it's just there if it's on background and white noise.
But to be fair as well, the main channel for soccer in America is NBC Sportsnet, so you're kind of comparing apples to apples there.
We've put a decent amount of soccer on our air here. It's been on a fair amount of screens. The most I've seen in the last couple of years has been on our screens in the background of certain places. Robin's always referenced, in sports bars or in a barbershop it's been on. I've seen it on in the background of a gym, so it feels like it's been comparatively on more screens lately. Maybe that's just where I've been, though.
It's dishonest to say that any company isn't going to want to push its own properties, right? That's a no-brainer. So the NBA being an ESPN property, obviously, I think that's one of the reasons for its recent boom. Has been the stars that came into the league, that LeBron and Banana Boat crew. Now you've got Steph Curry and all those guys. You had the Celtics and the Lakers meet in the finals in 2010 that I think helped. I think the decision actually really helps because it was a big, huge moment. And ESPN acquiring the rights, helped expand as well. But beyond that, basketball is more popular than hockey. So, that argument comes. I don't know if it's as much more popular as the coverage. I don't know. We'd have to really study that and measure that. But it is significantly more popular, and that's why it gets more coverage. That's really the root of it.
Yeah, that one's relatively easy to figure out.
First and Last.
Joining us now on the show Benzo Performance Line, we've got Mel Kiper Jr., who covers the NFL draft, as well as anyone can cover anything. And Mel, one of the news stories in the NFL draft, of course, is always where people are falling or rising as the draft approaches. And Reuben Foster's coming up on Mike and Mike at 9:30. You have Jabril Peppers, his situation. To me, I don't care if these guys are smoking weed. It wouldn't affect my evaluation at all. I can buy the idea that the teams say, hey, this shows that they don't take responsibility or that they could be suspended. Where do you peg guys in the evaluation process for something like those two guys are undergoing right now?
Well, I think what I look at is what is the team's thinking. So, you talk everybody has their friends in the league they talk to. And, I think what's going to happen with Reuben Foster, we'll start with him first. Great player. You could argue, guys, that he's the second best player in this draft. You can make a strong case that he's the second best player in this draft, behind Myles Garrett. So with that in mind, this notion that he's going second round or in the 20s, I think it's ridiculous. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to go no worse than mid-first round. And that's where he was projected to go. I had him going to Baltimore at one point, Indianapolis, on these different mock drafts. It's not like when I picked him for the mock, what we did with the GM mock with Todd, I took him at Tennessee at 5 because Todd had taken Marshawn Lattimore at 2. So, you're talking about a guy, one of the best players in this draft, who had been projected to go in the middle of the first. So he's not going to drop. He's not dropping at all. So I don't think it has any impact on Reuben Foster whatsoever. So, that's my feeling there. Jabril Peppers, there's been some mixed opinion on because nobody knows what the defined role of Peppers will be. He's going to be a safety. That's what he's going to be. But everybody's kind of wondering what's he going to be. He played linebacker. He was a slot corner. He was a wildcat quarterback. He was a punt returner. He was everything. Okay, so people were wondering about that. So that's why Peppers is a little harder to project. I had him going to Dallas near the end of the first round in a mock draft just recently. Okay, bumped him up a little bit. So he's going to be mid-first to late first. He's not going to be impacted. He's going to go in the late first. So I think at the end, after we talk next week about all this, I don't think it's going to have much impact at all on where these guys go in the draft based on projections and everything. Like I said, I won't say that it's not going to impact Peppers a little bit because it could, but I don't think it's going to have any impact on Foster and very minimal impact on Peppers.
Mel, so much has been made about the number 1 overall pick and the Browns putting out feelers that they're interested in Mitchell Trubisky. And let's say, I know in your mind you hinted Myles Garrett, the top player in the draft. So if Mitchell Trubisky doesn't go number 1 overall to the Browns, where do you think the most likely landing spot for him would be?
Well, Garrett's going number 1. I think I think in terms of Cleveland, what they have to try to figure out is how to get Trubisky. If they deem him worthy of being the number 1 pick, and there is a split within their organization, which you hear as the should we take Trubisky 1, because there's fear that somebody's going to take him. They say they take Myles Garrett 1. They don't know if they can get back in and get Trubisky. Maybe they're scared that somebody else from 2 to 6 is just going to take him. They're going to be unable to trade back up, and they're going to lose the quarterback they want. That's why there's this debate, I guess, as should we just take Trubisky at 1? Because they got to get a quarterback. That's the most important position on the football field. We all know that. I just think Trubisky at 1, I think he's the 20th best player in this draft. Take the 20th best player, number 1. When has that happened? So, Cleveland, that would be typical of the Cleveland Browns, do something like that, take the 20th best player. Now, that's on my board. I think Todd's even got him lower than that, Todd McShay. So I'm not the only one. And I like Trubisky, and I was the first one that came out with Trubisky on any boards this year. So I've always had him the number 1 quarterback. Todd hasn't. Todd had Watson, whatever. Now he's got Trubisky. I was Trubisky all along. So I'm the only one been consistent with that. Nobody else has. So, but I wouldn't take him number 1. You take Garrett, and if you love Trubisky that much, you try to get up from 12 to get him. And I'm not convinced teams at 2 or 3, which would be the 49ers and the Bears, are going to take Trubisky. There's talk now the Bears could take a quarterback. I don't think so. They're looking to get down, to move down. So there's going to be opportunities for Cleveland at 12, once they take Garrett at 1, to jump back up, utilize some of those picks they've accumulated, which is what you try to do, is accumulate picks to make these bold moves and get the right players. Not just to keep accumulating picks. What good is that? Okay, you end up with a team of a lot of pieces but no quarterback. So I think that's what's going to happen come draft day for the Cleveland Browns. We'll see.
Mel, you mentioned Mitchell being so low on your board and potentially being overdrafted. Is there another guy maybe outside of the quarterback position that you think could wind up getting his name called a lot earlier than he should based on skill level?
Well, I think Malik McDowell, I wouldn't say skill level on Malik McDowell, the defensive lineman from Michigan State, has tremendous skill set. He just was an underachiever this year at Michigan State. He didn't play nearly to the level of his talent. He did a couple games, but he certainly didn't late in the year. He could, based on the fact he's shown flashes of brilliance during his career. He looked like a top 5 pick when the season began. So there's a guy that's going to be very interesting to see who in the late first round takes Malik McDowell, saying, okay, here's a guy I thought to be a top 5 pick. We're picking in 20s. Yes, he didn't have the year expected, but we know we can motivate him. And once he's in the league, it's not going to be any issue about Michigan State had a bad year, and he didn't feel like, I guess, it was like, okay, I'm out here. I'm going to be a high pick. I'm going to team that's going nowhere. So, what's the reason that you didn't get necessarily the performance on a consistent basis you expected? Maybe it was that. So that's why Malik McDowell, I wouldn't say he's going to be a reach. I mean, I've dropped him a lot. But I think in the late first round, does he make sense to somebody, or does he go in the early second? I think it's going to be very interesting to see where he comes off the board.
First and last, Robin Lundberg, Mike Golic Jr. talking to Mel Kiper Jr. here on the Shell Pennzoil Performance Line. Now, Mel, you mentioned that you've had Trubisky at the top of your quarterback board, even if not at the top of your NFL draft board, the entire time. The other guy being mentioned there is Deshaun Watson. And I understand that college success doesn't always translate to pro success, but all last year I heard about Alabama and how they had basically a defense full of pros. Is there something to be said for what he did against them, and how do you project him in the pros? Could he exceed those expectations that you guys have him at right now?
No, I don't think that means anything. I think that's the most overhyped part of this whole evaluation is what he did against Alabama. It looks good. It's great to talk about. Makes sense to say, well, if he did it against Nick Saban and he did it against all those players, and that's great, but are you going to take Trevor Knight because he did really well against Nick Saban? I mean, are you going to take Trevor Knight from Texas A&M, formerly of Oklahoma? When he was Oklahoma, he did a great job. Are you going to take Johnny Manziel? Did a tremendous job. He gave Alabama fits. Is Johnny Manziel a great quarterback? Trevor Knight going to be a draftable quarterback? He might even get drafted as a quarterback. He may get drafted as a position change, and maybe to a safety spot or whatever, if he gets drafted at all. So a lot of quarterbacks have given Chad Kelly at Ole Miss, give Alabama some problems. So the bottom line is Alabama's had some issues with some quarterbacks along the way, especially the mobile ones, okay? So that's why you can't overreact or say, because of that, he's going to be great. Vince Young had a great game against USC. Outplayed Leinart, beat USC. Did he have a great career? You can't worry about that. You can't worry about a bad game a quarterback has against the team, like Derek Carr did in their bowl game, like Peyton Manning never beating Florida, like Roethlisberger being terrible against Iowa. All those things don't add up, and great performances against a certain team don't add up either. Now, it's tempting to say it does, but it really doesn't. History tells us it doesn't. So for Deshaun Watson, this notion that because he beat Alabama and almost beat him 2 years in a row is going to put him up in the elite group, like I said, I just found fault with that whole argument.
Mel, you've been going at this for a while. The big weekend finally coming up here. What's the first thing you have planned post-draft?
Post-draft we're coming back from Philadelphia. We're driving as soon as the draft's over. Todd McShay and I are driving up to Connecticut, and while we're driving up to Connecticut, I'm going to be reviewing the draft and grading the draft, and Todd's going to be figuring out his first round for next year, his mock draft for next year. And then when we get up to Connecticut, we're going to do review shows on Sunday and Monday as well. And then when I get back to Baltimore, it's time to basically, for me, get my big board for next year ready, because that comes out the week after the draft, and the top 5 positional rankings come out a week after the draft. So as soon as the draft's over, I start worrying about grading the draft and then grading players for next year's draft.
Mel, the grind truly never stops for you. It is an incredible sight to see. We appreciate you taking the time out for us this morning, man. Maybe at some point in there, slip in a vacation, go enjoy a little more pumpkin pie than usual, perhaps.
Yeah, the Darian Bell Show, I keep doing that until the end of May. So June and July is the vacation months, guys.
A man committed to his craft.
Thank you for listening to the First and Last podcast. You can listen and subscribe to all ESPN podcasts in the Listen tab of the ESPN app. First and Last.